Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Big development in the Red Bull front today, with one of Max Verstappen's chief requests going into 2025 potentially getting turned down by the team. Max was frustrated last year at Monza and Las Vegas, especially when his rear wing configuration made overtaking and winning the Grand Prix practically impossible. Red Bull did not have a low downforce spec rear wing, a Monza spec rear wing last year as many of the other teams did. Max wants that for Red Bull this year, but the team, with how they've spent their resources, certainly over all this flexi wing drama over the last few days, that may not be possible. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Starting with the following. This is Sauber. They are going to have a base in the UK. This is pretty interesting just because Sauber, of course, Swiss team, they are now going to be owned by Audi, German team, and Audi came in with this whole messaging around, oh, we're going to be the real German team, right? Because Mercedes, okay, they're German. Do they feel especially German? No, their drivers, at least, were British until Antonelli's come along, who's Italian. But yeah, the team's based in Brackley and Brixworth, and they're basically a UK team. So, and obviously with Hamilton, Russell over the last few years, I'm sure many German fans don't feel much allegiance to Mercedes. So Audi came in and said, hey, you know, German fans, we are going to be your team. And fair enough. But Sauber are going to have a new technical centre in the UK. So, you know, big news for UK motorsport, I guess, on some level. And that's what Mattia Binotto wants to do. But also, with Audi coming along and buying the team, does make you wonder a little bit as to whether this is, you know, on brand, as it were. The reality is maybe it just doesn't matter. If the team is going to be reasonably competitive regardless, these, it seems, are going to be the team, basically the branding overalls, right, for the new season. I think they leaked them. They've done these, like, cards. And, well, here's Bortoletto, here's Hulkenberg. This, it seems, is what the overalls are going to look like. You know, I'm not a massive, oh, wow, the overalls are crazy guy. But it does seem to have been leaked. So, yeah, anyway, there you go on that one. Williams, they are a fascinating team to me this season because last year, genuinely, they were better than I thought they'd be. Not in terms of crash damage, that was more than I thought. Albon, Sargent, Colapinto all deserve some blame for that. These poor fellas in the background, I'm sure, were putting in an absolute shift this year, as we full well know. They did, like, we believe something like $14 million in crash damage. The next highest team was at maybe $6 million. So, yeah, not ideal, of course. But this season should be a better year. The key point is that last off-season, it came out that Williams and James Vowles had gone through a very difficult period where everything in the team was getting transitioned over to actual modern architecture. It was revealed that Williams was still tracking all the parts associated with their car literally in Microsoft Excel. And it was an absolute nightmare. So Vowles built everything up from the ground up, said, look, this is what we've done at Mercedes. This is how we're going to move into actually the modern era here at Williams. And it meant that their car was barely done in time. I think it was overweight at the start of the season. They had a big challenge. But actually, it was still pretty all right? You know, the Williams last year was not an embarrassment of a car by any means. And they still scored a fair few points. So what's going to happen this season? Well, Williams believe, as a result of last off-season, they're now in a much better position. They expect to go up the grid. And that's very interesting, especially when you compare them to a team, let's say, such as Racing Bulls, or I think they literally are going to be called Racing Bulls this season. They are doing their filming day on the 17th of February at Imola. 200k filming day there. The interesting note about this is that it will be a similar looking car to last year's RB20. We know full well that AlphaTauri, as Racing Bulls they now are, have tried over, let's say, the last 2 seasons especially, to really close the gap between what they deliver on the track and what Red Bull have delivered on the track over the last few years. And that is not going to be stopping anytime soon, to such an extent that the front suspension and the side pods will just be ripped straight off the RB20. Now, they kind of did a similar thing for last year's V-Carb, which was ripped off the RB19, and I was, you know, not especially concerned, but I genuinely thought that last year's AlphaTauri, whatever you want to say, would be a really competitive car because it was a very close RB19 replica, as, you know, as much as the team could manage. It wasn't, obviously, but you know what I mean, right? They took all the parts they could within reason, but the RB19 was a monster and the RB20 was a monster in a different way, I guess. So that's why this year people are going to hear that they're taking the suspension and the side pods from the RB20 and they're going to say, oh, well, you know, good luck being competitive. competitive. The RB20 was a serious challenge, which it was, but it's also probably the best thing that racing balls can do. So that's the setup over there. We also hear from Mercedes, this is pretty interesting. You're never going to get rid of performance fluctuations, but this is, according to Merck anyway, their number one goal basically, right? Because they are not taking as aggressive an approach as the other teams are. They believe that their car, as it was, let's say, in Vegas, in Spa, in Silverstone, can be very quick, if not the fastest car on the day. So their belief is that if they make the car more consistent, they're going to be able to unlock more race victories. That's not going to eliminate performance fluctuations, and Mercedes maybe recognize that their concept is going to be fundamentally limited at some circuits, but they're willing to sacrifice that for potentially better gains elsewhere. Is this a championship-winning attitude? Possibly not, given the risk that other teams are taking, but I think it's interesting to see how Mercedes fare, given that they're not going to fix their car fully, it seems, but they're just trying to make a much better platform, at least for consistency. So it's not a complete pendulum for these guys every single weekend. But whether that works, that's another question. Speaking of Mercedes, actually, this was interesting. Pirelli did investigations into the failures for Hamilton and Sainz back at Qatar, and there was even a lot of speculation on this on the weekend. You guys know, was it Alex Albon's wing mirror fell off or whatever it was? Bottas went over it. I think it was Bottas. There was some sparks everywhere, and it looked like Hamilton had got a puncture because of that. But even then, Hamilton, when he got the puncture, wasn't convinced it actually was from that. And I think the puncture seemingly started to appear at around about the final corner before Hamilton actually got to the debris at the end of the main straight. Of course, very unfortunate puncture timing for Hamilton that race, because that meant that he had to do a whole lap on 3 tyres, which was never going to go well. He did make it back to the pits, of course, but his race at that point was ruined. But also the notable thing was it's the front left tyre. That is the tyre that gets most of the strain at Qatar. And we've seen this a few times now. Teams are going to have to continually be careful about this because, the report says the tyre did not fail because of debris, it was just excessive wear. But the interesting thing about these Pirelli tyres is that, let's say at Las Vegas, for example, the teams at least said the tyres weren't really wearing at all. The other teams were going through like a graining process of the rubber. Mercedes simply didn't have that, and therefore they were unbelievably rapid at Las Vegas, as I'm sure you guys remember. Qatar is interesting though, because it's not actually the rubber wearing which is necessarily causing the puncture. It's actually just the damage to the tyre itself, because you guys know that the curbs at Qatar are incredibly, pointy, for lack of a better word. This is an image that you guys may have seen before, but this is the type of curbing we're dealing with at Qatar. So you run over these enough times, as the drivers do, it's not actually the rubber wearing which gives way, which the teams can kind of track. It's just the internal structure of the tyre is getting torn apart. So I think that's why the teams at Qatar over the last few years, 2021 was another good example with Bottas, and I think maybe Russell, I forget exactly who, but there's been many tyre blowouts at Qatar, and it's not necessarily because the teams are trying to go too far on the rubber, it's because the actual structure of the tyre simply cannot handle it. And we've seen that before. We might well see it again, because the teams, even knowing this, are still, it seems, struggling to come to the right conclusion as to when the drivers need to pit, because Hamilton got the puncture on lap 34, Sainz I think got his puncture on lap 35. Speaking of Sainz and Hamilton, let's talk Ferrari. They're at Barcelona again today. These are the team kits for 2025. Is it good? Is it not good? Don't know. Enter into your thoughts in the comments below, and we've got a couple of further images on the matter here today. So overalls, team kits, whatever, it's Ferrari, it's red, it looks pretty good, I guess. There's also this, which I know people have been talking about. So the Ferrari hats this year for Hamilton and Leclerc, they have the driver numbers on 4416 and the driver logo. It's pretty interesting. So obviously it's got a Scuderia Ferrari logo, the prancing horse on the front, and then it's got the Hamilton logo on the back of this one, and then this seems to be Charles Leclerc's logo, which I don't know if that's always been his logo, but presumably that's his logo now, because this is clearly Hamilton's logo, so I think that's pretty clear cut. So yeah, that's the Ferrari update, apart from the update on track, and there's plenty to say there. Again, this is a very interesting tweet that we've seen lots of over the last few days, that both Ferrari and McLaren do not believe a conservative upgrade plan is going to be good enough next year. They're both going high risk and potentially high reward. I think one of these teams will likely win next year's Constructors' title, but it does open the door, right? Because Ferrari and McLaren seem to believe that to beat one another, they've got to take some serious risk. And if both of them take risk and it both backfires, then Mercedes or maybe Red Bull will be in the mix to pick up the pieces. So apparently even McLaren, this is a pretty remarkable statement, but we're hearing quite a lot of this lately, that McLaren believe, like they genuinely believe, they can make such a step that they're not even going to be challenged. And they're going to do, they're not going to do a Max 2023, but they think they can make such a step that the other teams will have no chance. So that's interesting that they believe that's possible, that they want to avoid scrapping with other teams. Maybe they want to avoid scrapping because they know their strategy and maybe even they know their drivers aren't always up to the task. That is maybe one debate. The car is the fundamentally important thing in Formula 1. To get to that point, Ferrari are doing some more testing today. So Hamilton is in the SF-24, last year's Ferrari for the first time. Leclerc is in the SF-23 doing some TPC testing, which of course he missed out on the other day because Hamilton put it in the wall at the final corner, we believe. So therefore the car was damaged, Leclerc couldn't do his running, so they're doing it instead today. So again, the team Ferrari are at Barcelona, they're putting in the laps, and Hamilton started his work on the Pirelli 2026 tyres. So a modified version of the SF-24, they've not just wheeled Leclerc's SF-24 out of the garage from Abu Dhabi, like this is going to be a mule car, a test car, but it's basically the same car, just with some adaptations. Leclerc's doing the testing in the SF-23 instead, and it's a big day. So SF-24 has been adapted for the narrower tyres. That's, I think, the change they've made to it. And, the engines are back on, as Rosario describes. McLaren has already done this, though, on testing the cars. Of course, it's especially critical for Hamilton. Getting some running in last year's Ferrari, I think, is as good as he can really ask for. But it's not all ideal for Hamilton, because I think ideally Hamilton would like to run it in a very similar way to how Leclerc and Sainz ran it last year. But Ferrari are saying, no, Lewis, we want you to test out the car as if we're in 2026 already, where the cars are going to have less downforce and these new tyres. So that's what Hamilton's been doing today, putting in laps around Barcelona with a lower downforce setup. You can probably even see it if we zoom in here on this image, to be honest, the lower downforce version of the rear wing that Hamilton is running here. I guess there's not really that many pixels in this image, but like an image like this, I think you can probably see that rear wing is pretty flat. Like, I think it's pretty clear there's not much downforce on this car. This, I believe, is like, the run to the final corner, isn't it? So this is maybe turn 11, I think it's called. And then there used to be the run into the chicane. You used to go, right, left, and then, right again. I think Hamilton there is sending it through to the final corner. So, this is Hamilton today in the SF-24 with a lower downforce. I'm sure it's absolutely rapid on the straight with the new Pirelli 2026 rubber on. So this is Ferrari's best try to replicate as much as they can what they're going to see in 2026. So fundamentally, Ferrari is saying, all right, Lewis, you'll drive in for us. We pay you the money. You drive this car, and it will be helpful to us. We want to understand what's going to happen in 2026 with these downforce levels, with these new tyres, as McLaren have already done. But also, Hamilton gets a chance to at least, although it maybe not be, it's a Monza spec car kind of thing, but it's still an SF-24 that was not driven that long ago in, proper competition, right? Speaking of a Monza spec rear wing, let's talk about the situation at Red Bull, because it's been fascinating over the last few days. You guys may have seen the drama around the flexible wings. The flexi rear wings, they've been outlawed, the mini DRS and all this, fine. The flexi front wings, though, have caused much more controversy. And the FIA seemingly were going to say, you know what, guys, you crack on, do what you like. They've changed their mind, it seems, and from Spain, the 9th Grand Prix, 8th Grand Prix of the season, they are seemingly going to shut down flexible wings and do whatever they can to restrict that from the testing and the static load test and all this type of stuff. Now, Red Bull and Pierre Wache, it seems, put a lot of time into developing these flexible front wings, which that time has now, to some degree, been squandered. That's why Red Bull are so frustrated, it seems, with these new rules, which are apparently coming into place in the very near future. Now, this is aligned with the fact that there's a budget cap nowadays. There's an amount of time you can spend testing these things. And Max Verstappen's frustration last year on the state of the RB20. There were some weekends, Monza and Las Vegas were examples, Baku maybe to some degree as well, where low downforce rear wings are not only utilised, but frankly a necessity if you want to compete on a grid which is competitive. The RB19, frankly, could do whatever the hell it wanted. High downforce rear wing at Monza, fine, no problem, you're still going to win by 20 seconds. Last year was not the same story, right? The other cars got way better. If you've not got a rear wing designed for those specific high-speed circuits that Red Bull did not, and some teams decide, not to design and build a circuit-specific rear wing for Monza and maybe Vegas and stuff like this, Baku, for example, because they think, well, it's only a couple of races a year. We're going to be good enough elsewhere to win anyway. We'll put our development resources somewhere else. The problem is, in a very contested fight, if you're going into a weekend knowing that it's damage limitation, knowing that you're not going to win because you simply can't compete with the others on the straight, you're not going to be able to make an overtake happen when it matters, that type of stuff, then you kind of have, it's difficult to keep your faith and also difficult to have a chance, really, especially when the championship is meant to be so competitive. So this is why this situation is very interesting, because Red Bull are saying, look, Max, we may try, we can try to get you a rear wing specific for those high-speed circuits that we did not have last year, but it's not guaranteed at all, because they want to address the car's balance issues first. They now will not be able to fully do that through the use of flexible wing technology because it's going to be outlawed at some point. So the resources that they spent on developing the flexi wings will now probably be transmitted into developing another solution to the issues that they found. Is there going to be any time or money left to develop a specific high-speed rear wing? Probably not. So, tweet your thoughts in the comments below on that, but that's the latest development today from Red Bull, really, that Max Verstappen's frustrations at a couple of Grand Prix last year may well continue. And look, Max's frustrations are a very important thing to keep an eye on, really, because if Max doesn't win this upcoming year's title, it's indicative of Red Bull having a significant decline in competitiveness. The more weekends during the year where Max feels frustrated, and there will be some, it always happens with every driver, especially Max, it increases the likelihood that he's going to look elsewhere for another team, maybe Mercedes, maybe even something like an Aston Martin. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.